Fabulous. Thanks for the
Yes.
introduction, Mom, and thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoy this presentation. I previously did a travel talk on Peru, which hopefully some of you got to see, but this time I am taking you to the empire that conquered Peru and the Incas in the 16th century, Spain. So I was visiting a very good friend in Madrid and Segovia just this past March, and I'm going to take you through some of the really cool places that I visited and things that I saw. Uh, so first and foremost, here a little geographic orientation. So here's the Iberian Peninsula in Spain. You can see Madrid is right smack dab in the center of the country. It was chosen as the locale for the royal court in 1516 because of that, because it was right in the middle of the country, and because at the time it was just an outskirt defense town for Toledo to the south here. So it didn't have much going for it. No large economic centers or established religious control. And King Philip II thought this is a great place for me to impose control all on my own and make our new secure capital. A shout out to my wonderful friend Louisa, who you can see here. She was my tour guide and the inspiration for my visit. A very good college friend of mine. She's teaching in Madrid on a Fulbright scholarship. And if that wasn't enough, just because she's such an amazing person, she also spends her free time teaching English classes at the Red Cross in Madrid. I wanted to give a shout out to the Red Cross at this time because Louisa took me along to one of her English classes, and it was very obvious that when we were there in March, they were doing a lot of hard work relocating Ukrainian refugees who are now settling in Madrid. So a big shout out to them and all the hard work that they're doing. All right, let's go. All right. So Madrid is a fabulous city. It is so much fun to visit. This is me looking at the Alfonso the 12th statue and monument in Retiro Park. And I love this picture, not only because I'm thinking, oh, this is so cool, but because you can see to the left, big apartment building going up just outside the park limits. Madrid is a really cool city because it has the historic, and the modern, the rural, and the urban right on top of each other. And as the political capital of Madrid for such a long time, it's got a really storied history and fascinating culture. It's the second largest city in the European Union, only after Berlin. So it's has a huge and very diverse population. So here's another great moment to highlight how urban and rural the city is, right? The top picture here is the Plaza Mayor, or the main plaza, bustling with people in the center of Madrid. And at the bottom here is Casa del Campo, an enormous, massive countryside park um, where you can go and get a breath of fresh air. But Madrid's a really fun city, and Ernest Hemingway said of it that it's the most Spanish of all cities, the best to live in with the finest people. He'd never found a city where there were fewer reasons to go to bed. And it's very true that when he was living there, he was wild, partying to all hours of the night. And his time in Spain inspired a lot of his books, most famously, The Sun Also Rises and For Whom the Bell Tolls. And he was really involved in the culture and the politics of the city, and loved it a lot. I already spoke a little bit about the history. Before Spain was made the center of the country in the royal court, um, it was actually part of the big Islamic empire, the Umayyad Empire that had spread into Spain. And I'll talk more about that when I show you my explorations of Segovia. But it was reconquered by the Catholics and um, brought back into the fold of Spanish Empire at the end of the 15th century, and has since been the site of every big political event that's taken place during the history of Spain. So the War of Spanish Succession, the Peninsular War, which was Spain's version of the Napoleonic Wars, and of course, the Spanish Civil War. But I thought instead of giving you kind of a boring list of historical dates and events, I would take you through some of these interesting rebellions and political events through artwork. Because the first place that I went when I got to Madrid, the very first stop along the way, was the Prado Museum. Second only to the Louvre in Paris, the Prado is an absolutely amazing art museum with fabulous works. And you cannot take pictures inside. The security guards are very strict about that, of course. And this was one of the only pictures I took. But I thought that it was a great picture to include, because when I walked into the museum, I was absolutely overwhelmed. There's so much going on, so many people. I was sweating and had a headache and had to escape and get to the cafes, have a nice glass of orange juice and this pastry, which was absolutely delicious. But the Prado is an amazing museum, and once I was fortified, I tackled it as best I could. Spent 4 hours in the collections trying to explore every room. But I wanted to talk about those important events in Madrid history, looking at a couple paintings. So one of the most famous is Francisco Goya's The 3rd of May, 1808. You can see very sad graphic depiction of the French soldiers executing the Spanish resistors who rose up against Napoleon's army in 1808 to try to retake Spain and the Spanish capital. So this is one of the most patriotic symbols, patriotic paintings in Spain. You can see it at the Prado, and it's very well remembered as representing the Spanish bravery of these many citizens during the 1808 uprising. And Francisco Goya is one of Spain's favorite artists. This painting was painted after his dark period, or into his dark period. He went deaf in 1793. So he, after that happened, his work started to get a little bit more morbid and gruesome. But if you go to the third floor of the Prado, which very few people venture to, you'll see some of his earlier works of happy garden scenes with children on swings, etc. So Goya was a very talented artist, painting the happy and the sad parts of Spanish history. My favorite painting in the Prado is actually this painting. You'll see many similarities between it and the previous one, namely the bloodied dead people in the foreground here. This is the execution of Torrijos and his companions at the beach in Malaga. Another important moment in Spanish history was when a liberal-minded democratic reformer, Torrijos, a retired soldier, and his friends tried to stage a rebellion against King Ferdinand VII, but they were ambushed in southern Spain on the coast here at Malaga and executed without trial on the beach. So you can see the monks here and the Spanish soldiers under order from the king executing Torrijos and his companions. But this was commissioned to remember the bravery of these gentlemen. It's very much the Les Miserables of Spain, and is today a much beloved painting in the Prado. So last but not least, I wanted to point out another famous painting. This is Guernica by Pablo Picasso, painted in 1937 during the Spanish Civil War, which some of you might be familiar with. It's not at the Prado, it's actually at the Reina Sofia Museum, and it commemorates this horrible bombing of the town of Guernica during the Spanish Civil War, actually by Nazi planes and bombers who were on the side of the nationalists during the war. The Spanish Civil War was a big battle between kind of left-wing Republicans and the nationalists led by General Francisco Franco, who eventually won the war and established a dictatorship. And this painting is by far one of the most famous housed in Madrid, and it shows just the horror and the angst, the terror and the inhuman death that happened during this war. Going through the Reina Sofia Museum was really quite depressing. It's a famous museum and an important part of history, but it put me in a funk for the rest of the day, and I had to have some paella and vermouth for dinner. But an important part of history, and I just wanted to um, quickly comment here that Francisco Franco died, I think, in 1977, ending the dictatorship. But the memory of him and his influence on Madrid's culture and the Spanish community is still felt today, 45 years after his death. Small effects on people's everyday lives are still remembered by some adults or through passing this information on through families. Small things like women couldn't have bank accounts are still affecting people's lives. And it was here at the Puerto de Alcalá that Luisa pointed out to me that all these cars going around the center of this big arch in the city didn't have bumper stickers. The things that we kind of take for granted in the United States of being proud and unafraid of just expressing our political opinions still doesn't exist as strongly in Spain. There's still a little bit of a concern amongst the older generation about broadcasting one's political beliefs, and Luisa and many people think that's a remnant of the early of the past political system. But I did see quite a lot of political graffiti, so I think the younger generations overcome that. Certainly overcome that, and you can see people expressing their political opinions in Madrid today quite a bit. So let's stop dwelling on that for a little while. After going to the Prado, Luis and I went out to check Madrid's fabulous parks. So this is the park of Buen Retiro, or Good Rest or Relaxation, in Spain. Or in Madrid. You can see on the far left here, this is a close-up of that monument that I showed you earlier with King Alfonso XII astride his horse. This is Luisa before the Royal Palace, or the Crystal Palace, which is a beautiful spot in the garden. Lovely trees, the Rose Garden, and the famous statue of the Fallen Angel in the southwest quarter. This park we spent a lot of time in, just kind of chilling out on the grass with all the madrileños, as people of Madrid are called. And we had a fabulous time exploring the park. I remember when we used to have to include a picture of a bird in every travel talk that we did, and I wanted to make sure I included this little bird here. It's a monk parakeet, or a Quaker parrot, bright neon green, and these little parrots were flying everywhere in the park, really giving it quite a tropical feel. They're an invasive species, and have their populations really exploded in the past 5 years. They were just everywhere. We loved exploring the park, went to many cool small gardens within the park, all with different names. This one, I believe, is called something like the Garden of Memory. They all had similar names, like the Garden of Reminiscence, the Garden of Not Forgetting Things, and of course I've forgotten which one is which, but really a beautiful site in the city. The second main park in Madrid is Casa del Campo, and it is extraordinary. It's 5 times the size of Central Park. And once you get half a mile in, it's like you're in the countryside. You can see here this beautiful wildflower meadow where we spent some time. Luisa described it as being in a living Van Gogh painting, which I think is the perfect way to put it. It's so pastoral, it's so quiet and peaceful. There are herds of sheep and goats that graze throughout it, and it really is like being right in the countryside inside of the city. The best way to see it is by far by bicycle, which we did. And if anyone visits Madrid, I'd highly recommend this. You can head out on the paths, steep, rocky, um, fun to bike around and have a great time. Pull over to that wildflower meadow and spend a nice afternoon hanging out and uh, putting the concerns about previous uh, times, angsty times in Spanish history to bed for a while as you appreciate its happy future. So a wonderful time in Casa del Campo. I really enjoyed that bike ride. We did a lot of hiking, a lot of biking, exploring these parks. We had to fortify ourselves, and I know it's important to everyone that I share a little bit about what food we ate. The traditional Madrid breakfast that we had every day is something like this, which I really enjoyed, you can tell. Cafe con leche, creamy cappuccino coffee, zumo de naranja, which is fresh squeezed orange juice, which they had everywhere. You'll remember I needed it at the Prado. And then, of course, chocolate croissant or another pastry. This was the breakfast that we had nearly every day. Very delicious. The other food that I enjoyed was mostly tapas. So for people who don't know, tapas are usually small snack plates that you can get for free at a bar with drinks or a larger meal. Um, and though many people who visit Spain love Barcelona, Madrid also has fabulous tapas and is right up there contending with Barcelona's for the best tapas in the country. So I included here some of my favorite treats that we had exploring the tapas bars and restaurants. Number one on the list is absolutely these croquetos de jamón, or ham and cheese croquettes. Fried, creamy, absolutely delicious, and we had to try them everywhere we went. This picture in the middle here is Iberian ham. It's a salted cured meat, kind of like a prosciutto, and you would walk down the streets and the vendors would be carving it right off of the ham hock, much like in this picture. It was often served as a tapa on bread or with potatoes, and it was really good. These are boquerones, basically sardines that are battered and fried whole. This plate is almost identical to the one that was served to us. These aren't my pictures because I just eat food. I don't really photograph it, but this is identical to the plate that we had, and it was gone very quickly because Luis and I love boquerones. Even though Madrid's very far from the coast, it had really good seafood, and camarones or gambas, prawns and shrimp are quite popular on sandwiches or open face sandwiches called tostas, which I really enjoyed. And then last but not least, a very traditional Madrid dish is a tortilla. Very different from the tortillas that you would have in Latin America. The Madrid tortilla is basically a big, heavy ham and egg pie. And you would get this at any time of day in any bar, restaurant, or convenience store in Madrid. It's a classic dish. I wasn't a huge fan of it, but it's still something well worth trying. This is a fabulous market that we visited right next to the main plaza, Plaza Mayor in Madrid. It's known as El Mercado de San Miguel. It has these glass walls and feels very much like a train station inside. It's bustling, filled with vendors selling all sorts of tapas and drinks and chocolates. It was we had a fabulous time in there, and that's something that I'd love to visit again to try many of the foods that I did not get to try the first time we were there. Of course, with your food, you must have drinks. So the two main drinks that I tried while in Spain and are classic Spanish beverages are vermouth and tinto de verano. And this vermouth is a very sweet red vermouth. It's a classic Madrid drink. You get it de grifo, which means on tap, right in a from a barrel behind the bar. It's very sweet, very strong, and according to Luis's housemates, it's the drink that the old men have on a Sunday afternoon in what they call the final pew, which is the bar for those people who have not gone to mass in the morning. But vermouth is it was very delicious and definitely worth trying if you get to Madrid. Tinto de Verano, which you see here, is another great Madrid drink. It's very like sangria, but it's carbonated and a little bit more citrusy. And it's something that we had to try a lot with all of our tapas. Dessert, of course, is what follows. And this is a very famous chocolateria, also near the Plaza Mayor, Chocolateria San Ginés. As you can see, quite old and famous for serving chocolate and churros. These churros are unsweetened, fried. They're very delicious. You dip them in your chocolate here, which is really like a hot pudding. It's got a very thick consistency, not like hot chocolate at all, very much like warmed up pudding. And you can tell that I really loved those churros and chocolate. They were absolutely delicious. Of course, another thing that Luis and I did a lot in Spain was just walk the neighborhoods and explore various areas. And while for the sake of time, I won't go through every place that we went here, I wanted to point out a couple cool streets that we walked down. The first of which is Grand Via, that picture you see there, and this one. Um, Famous shot of Diana the Huntress shooting her arrows across the street. I love this picture because you can see a little plane in the background there. The beautiful street of Gran Via is filled with 20th century architecture, facades of historic buildings that have been restored. It's also the famous home of the Madrid equivalent of the Tooth Fairy, who is a little mouse who lives in the Gran Via metro station, the most beautiful metro station on the planet, to be sure. So it's a really cool place to explore with a lot of shops to check out as well. This plaza, Plaza de Cibeles, with the government building and this famous statue and fountain out front, is also a really cool spot. It intersects with the Paseo del Prado, which will bring you to the Prado Museum. And this street has recently been named a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So very culturally significant, and will bring you past a lot of amazing sites, including this plaza that you see here. I really enjoyed exploring the neighborhoods. Lavapiés is another really cool place to visit with a big immigrant community and lots of non-Madrid, non-Spanish cuisine to try. There's another great neighborhood called Barrio de las Letras, which is the literary quarter. It has quotes from Spain's famous poets in the pavement and many, many bookshops to explore, which was great fun as well. I won't take you there right now for time's sake, but I will take you, of course, to the Royal Palace. This was one of my favorite places that we visited. It's the Spanish Versailles. Absolutely beautiful inside. You can tell the gilding, the chandeliers, the marble statues, all the wealth that Spain gleaned from Latin American colonies, gold, silver mines, in the Philippines, in Peru, in Argentina and Central America, flowed back into the Spanish coffers and went towards building this extraordinary palace and equipping it in all its splendor. And the style that you see it in now is much the work of this famous monarch, Charles III, who reigned in the 18th century. He's maybe a controversial figure because he really cracked down on those people living in Latin America at the time, but he was also a big benefactor to the city of Madrid. You'll see a lot of monuments of him throughout the city because he was a big uh, patron of the arts, of universities, built a lot of hospitals and community centers. So he's rather beloved in Madrid today, and is probably one of the most recognizable monarchs in pictures and statues because of his extremely pointy aquiline nose. Um, this is the royal crest seen in Spain today. It's all of the regions: Leon, Castile, uh, Aragon, Navarre, and I believe the pomegranate is Granada, um, encapsulated with this golden fleece necklace from an old fraternal order founded in the 1400s by Philip the Good. And today, the monarchy in Spain is much like the monarchy in England. This handsome young man here is the current king, Felipe VI, who succeeded his dad, Juan Carlos I, who you see here back in 2014. And even though Felipe is technically the commander in chief of the army, he's mostly handling, having ceremonial duties, handling important public events. Really, him and his wife and his two daughters, are social media icons in Spain today, which is a constitutional monarchy. The palace, interestingly, had both Juan Carlos' abdication speech and Felipe VI's acceptance speech with the royal scepters, and an interesting collection of Stradivarius violins from old palace musicians. But that's what the monarchy looks like in Spain today. Right across from the royal palace is Almudena's Cathedral, which is a very beautiful cathedral where I went to Mass when I was in Madrid. And amazingly, we were there right before the Sunday right before Palm Sunday. So we got to watch a march, the procession of a statue of Jesus on the donkey, surrounded by palms, moving from the royal palace to the cathedral where it was installed to await the Easter season. It was really fun and interesting to watch that procession and then to participate in the Mass the next day. Almudena's Cathedral is also a mix of the modern and the ancient. On the left here, you can see a statue of the Virgin of Almudena, who is Madrid's patroness. This very statue is believed to have been around since the 11th century, and there's a fabulous story accompanying it, in that when the Christians came to reconquer Madrid from the Moors, the Islamic people occupying the city at the time, they prayed and prayed before the walls, and this icon, which had been hidden in the walls when the Christians were kicked out of Madrid the first time, the walls crumbled right around her and allowed them to enter the city and reconquer it, establishing Christian control of Madrid once more. So she's a very famous patroness, and you can see all these people standing in line here to say a prayer before her. On the right here, right above the altar, you can see these geometric designs that appear very, very modern, kind of clashing with the medieval picture on the left, which is really interesting. Almudena's Cathedral was actually only consecrated in the 90s, so it's a relatively new church, but it highlights the ancient Catholic traditions that have been enduring in Spain for centuries. So a really cool place to visit as well. And just another footnote here, a strange thing to see in Madrid, but this is the Egyptian Temple of Debat, relocated from Egypt to Madrid when the Aswan High Dam was being constructed, and it was going to be destroyed. So it was given as a gift to the Spanish king and installed here in Madrid. It remains a favorite place to watch the sunset. And I thought it was a cool spot to do just that when I visited that final day. So, next on the list, I wanted to talk about Segovia. So Segovia is only 40, 50 miles northwest of, or northeast of Madrid. And it's a really cool city with fabulous history. And I really wanted to check out the Alcazar here, which you can see me pointing at very enthusiastically. So I'll take you on a quick tour of that city as well. We went on a fast high-speed rail through the countryside, very quick and efficient travel, and arrived in Madrid. Here is the aqueduct built by the Romans in 50 BC, moving through Segovia back when the Roman Empire encapsulated much of Spain. Oh, here it is. And of course, here's the fabulous late Gothic Segovia Cathedral. You saw its ceiling as the first panel in the presentation. It was very, very beautiful. And here's Luisa and me at the Alcazar. So the Alcazar was formerly the Muslim palace, the Moorish palace, and then became the Christian Spanish palace in the 15th century. But when you walk inside, especially by gazing at the ceilings and the art in these rooms, you can see a lot of Islamic influence. This was a really cool room where you can, where all of these seated Spanish monarchs gaze down at you. And you can see how amazing these geometric patterns and ceilings were. This is actually called the pine cone room because all of these little gilded droplets look very much like pine cones coming down from the ceiling. But this art and this style is very reminiscent of Islamic art and would have been built and influenced by the Islamic rulers who once lived here. Here's another fabulous ceiling. I loved this. It was really cool. You could also see this in the tiling surrounding by much Christian art. I really like this picture because I thought this lovely lady looked a bit like me reading a book. That's definitely what I would have been doing if I had lived in the Alcazar. And you can see this beautiful tiling work down here, another stylistic element reminiscent of Islamic art. Here are some beautiful views from the top of the Alcazar, looking north and south. You can see here the Segovia Cathedral that I just pointed out. And actually, these very large storks that were flying around everywhere, nesting close to the Alcazar. Below the Alcazar, there's a series of really interesting trails and walking paths. You could see from that first picture that I showed you that it's up on a hilltop, basically carved into a mountainside to be protected. And you can venture down into kind of this terrestrial underworld and check out the rock formations and the geology right beneath the walls. So here's me kind of exploring one of those caves that we found on our walk. There are still many stories, even to this day, of hidden Moorish gold buried in these caves somewhere, which I was not looking for, of course. Here's another picture. There's the Alcazar right behind me on the trail. You can see it perched up on the top there. And this was really my favorite part of the whole trip. I'd had a fantastic time in Madrid and it was wonderful to experience everything that I had, but coming out into this opening and seeing the Alcazar was really fabulous. And I was so happy to experience that. I had a great time and want to leave you all here with me in my elation of finally seeing the Segovia Alcazar. So I'm happy to answer any questions people might have. There's a lot that I didn't get to mention, so please ask away.
What a wonderful, this is Dave. What a wonderful travel. How was your Spanish, and how did you get by with language?
Thanks. Great question, Dave. My Spanish is mediocre, and Luisa's Spanish is fantastic. She grew up speaking Portuguese, so was able to transition to Spanish very well. It's amazing how many people immediately spoke English with me, many Madrileños being familiar with the tourists. But I tried really hard to practice my Spanish, especially in ordering food, and people were very kind in letting me to do that, chuckling at my accent. But I'd highly recommend, if you're traveling there, that you brush up on your Spanish or train yourself a little bit. Also, just as a courtesy to people, they often appreciate you trying. I studied Spanish in high school and briefly when I was in Peru, but it had been a long time since I'd practiced. So it was nice to have a companion who knew her Spanish very well. Actually, when we were in Segovia, I picked up a copy of Washington Irving's The Tales of the Alhambra in Spanish because I had the English copy, and thought that having both would help me finally get a better grasp of the language. And that book was accidentally left behind. So hopefully I'll get it one day and be able to improve my vocabulary.
And what time of year you're wearing a jacket?
Yes. So this was just a couple months ago. So this was the end of March, beginning of April. The weather was temperamental. You could probably see in some pictures it was a very blue sky, and some pictures it was a cloudy gray sky. In March over there, it can be pretty chilly, but the weather's mercurial and always changing. I got a sunburn while I was there too. So springtime has variable temperature. This day in Segovia was pretty chilly though. Any other questions? Yeah.
Makes me want to travel.
Good. I hope so. Yeah, I think, as I mentioned briefly before, I think when many people visit Spain, they love to see the southern coast or to go to Barcelona. And while I definitely think Barcelona is amazing and I'd love to go there one day, Madrid is a fabulous place to visit. And these small ancient towns like Segovia, Avila, Toledo are also like fabulous side trips, and typically less crowded during the spring. So if anyone is thinking of visiting, I know a couple people before the talk started said they might go to Spain. I highly recommend putting Madrid on your list. Yeah.
So what's next? Where are you heading next?
I don't know. I think I might relax for a while. Got a lot of work to do now. This was it was a bit of I'd been impatient to travel again following the pandemic, and this was really my first big trip. With the family went to Ireland, and then I went to Spain directly after. So this was the first big trip that we'd been on since the pandemic. So it was really exciting, and I was very impatient to go back again. But I got my wanderlust out of the way for a short time, and I'm not sure where I'll be going next.
Thank you, Mon. Was there any other place that in Spain that you you wish you'd gone to, or that your friend mentioned visiting for those that are interested in going to Spain?
Yeah, so actually Malaga, which is the southern coastal city um, that featured in that execution painting I brought up earlier, was visited by Louisa, and she thought it was a lovely, a really a wonderful place, well worth visiting. And she also visited Basque Country to the north, which I've not visited, but and I would really need to do more research on. But she recommended it as a really cool place to visit. So if people are doing research, they might want to check out Malaga and Basque Country. I would have also loved to have gone a bit farther south to see the Don Quixote windmills, but I did not have enough time to do that. And if you do have more time than I did, that's another spot that I really wanted to go that I didn't get to. The areas just outside Madrid, like Segovia or Toledo, are really easy to visit. I mentioned that Madrid, we took a train there, and Madrid has a really efficient high-speed rail system that reaches throughout the country. So it's very efficient and cheap to travel on the train. And if you have a lot of time and want to go to various places, you can get there even if they're pretty far apart for day trips, weekend trips, stuff like that.
I was surprised at the green space, the different parks that you were showing. There is a lot of that then, or is the city concentrated in one area?
Yeah, so the Casa del Campo, which I mentioned is the biggest country park in Madrid, is kind of it's on the edge of the city um, by the Royal Palace and the river, and it's not really in the center of city, the city's area. The first park that I mentioned, Retiro Park, is definitely a bit more urbanized. It's right in the center of the bustling city. Casa del Campo is a bit removed from that, but it's an enormous space, and it's a bit disorienting. You don't see it as often, but the people of Madrid have resisted developing it very much because they like having that slice of nature really close to the city, so they can visit it when they want. And I think I mentioned like there were sheep and goats and stuff, all sorts of livestock in the park. But there's also, a little amusement park and several restaurants on a lake where you can rent boats and row right on the edge. So some of the parts of the park are being developed for recreation, but quite a lot of it is just open, rolling hills and wildflower meadows. So yeah, and the people of Madrid want to keep it that way.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Nothing else?
Did you have any fancy cocktails or drinks?
Oh, good question, Michaela. The two favorite drinks I mentioned earlier, the vermouth and the Tinto de Verano, were definitely my favorite drinks. In the big glass market that I pointed out, there were many bars experimenting with artisanal sangrias, and I did try one of those. It was pear and passion fruit, which does not really belong together, but it tasted wonderful. And the Tinto de Verano and the vermouth are definitely the most popular cocktails to be had. And I tried those very often, and they were delicious. In Segovia, I had my first glass of vermouth with lunch, and it was very delicious and warmed me up in reference to Dave's question about the cold. Yes, it was very good. The city of Madrid is actually quite famous for its rooftop bars. There are lots and lots of rooftop bars in the city of Madrid. And alas, I did not get to go to one of these rooftop bars because some of them are quite expensive. And during COVID, they were requiring people to make reservations and pay in advance. So that was not something I got to do. But if anyone else travels there, I'd highly recommend that because apparently the rooftop bars are great fun and give you a wonderful view of the city, as well as good food and drink.
I didn't want to get into anything political, but I was wondering how the atmosphere was, you know, as an American. Did you encounter any, I don't know, discordance between, because their country, I guess, is more aligned with Russia against, you know, the rest of the European Union, from what I've read. Did you pick up on any?
I didn't really experience anything like that when I was there. Didn't really experience much political tension in regards to Russia. I mentioned briefly that the Red Cross I was helping Louisa out at was very anti-Russia and doing really good work to help Ukrainian refugees while I was there. The signs on the wall and the various efforts of the people I was talking to there in the relocation office was quite admirable. In terms of the other kind of political atmosphere in Spain, there is tension between the kind of far right and far left groups, just like there is everywhere, well, in most countries nowadays. And you could see quite a lot of graffiti in alleyways and some public spaces expressing hatred of other political parties in flowerful language. But no one actually spoke to me about the politics or ever made me feel uncomfortable or on the wrong side of their political agenda when I was there.
Thank you. This presentation was awesome. You did a great job with the photography. Thanks again.
Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Yeah, I had to rely on my dear friend Louisa for several of the pictures. She's much better at documenting things than I am. And I want to say once again that she was a fabulous travel companion. We're both kind of no stress, go with the flow travelers, just head out and explore, which is a good strategy to adopt in a city like Madrid that's really walkable and has a lot of hidden gems.
Can I ask another question?
Yes, please do.
So you mentioned the green parrot birds. Did you see any other unique animals on your travel?
That's another great question, sis. Honestly, the birds were the only thing that really stuck out in my mind. And that beautiful parrot that I mentioned before in the park, and then these white storks that were flying around the Alcazar were really the two main species of wildlife that I remember thinking were interesting. Other than that, not really anything comes to mind, but I did talk about the parrots a bit in detail. The storks that were in Segovia were massive. These are white storks. They make like 4 or 5 foot wide nests. Their wingspans are wider than my height. They're really massive birds, and were pretty amazing to watch flying about the Alcazar on the windy day. So that was pretty memorable as well. And as we were taking the train through from Madrid to Segovia, it was really remarkable the wide expanse of kind of unpopulated and agricultural land. Spain's well known for being very densely populated in its urban areas and very sparsely populated in something like 70% of the country holds like 10% of the population. I'm not sure if I'm getting the statistics exactly correct, but 70% of the country is very sparsely populated. And as we were driving the train, you could see it's very agrarian, agricultural, filled with sheep and cattle, but very, very few people. But beautiful countryside. It was interesting to see the other side of the country.
Were there mountains or was it flat?
Oh yes, I'm so glad you brought that up, Mom. I almost forgot. Yes, so Segovia is pretty is close to a mountainous region, and you could see while I was there, actually going back to Dave's question about the chilly day, the snow on the mountain in the distance. And actually, when we were in the Alcazar following our tour and hanging out in the courtyard, it started to snow. And it was very surprising because in one day, because of our altitude, we'd experienced beautiful sunshine and snow within 5 hours. So yes, there was a beautiful mountain very close to Segovia. There are some mountains north of Madrid there, and it causes quite a lot of snow in this area.